Good afternoon. My name is Dan Marzano, UBA Manager of Strategic Solutions. On behalf of United Benefit Advisors and Paylocity, I welcome you to today's presentation in the UBA Employee Benefit Webinar Series. Today's topic is Reinventing the Employee Experience with Shari Simpson of Paylocity. Shari Simpson is a seasoned HR pro with 16 plus years of experience under her belt. As a multi-talented HR expert, she brings a fresh and veteran perspective to various subjects, from training and development to talent acquisition and employee relations. Shari rocks the mic on the HR Mixtape podcast, where she drops knowledge with other industry legends. But she doesn't stop there. Shari is always finding new ways to elevate HR, payroll, and business pros, whether it's through speaking at national conferences, collaborating with other leaders, or co-leading a women's employee resource group. Shari, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dan, for such a nice intro. I'm excited to be able to spend the next 40-ish minutes with you all talking about reinventing the employee experience. It's something that I am extremely passionate about and think it's at the forefront of what we've been experiencing now and over the last few years. I want to start by talking a little bit about the changing landscape and what we have been through in the last 3 years, starting with March of 2020. I think back to when COVID kind of first hit. I was attending a conference in Florida at the end of February. And I remember coming back and talking to my leaders and saying, yeah, there was all these people on the plane who had masks and it was weird. And I didn't really think this was going to be that big of a deal. And then literally 2 weeks later, our entire country is in lockdown. And as you know, we continue to go through a lot of changes that happened over the last couple of years. We had to deal with mask mandates and vaccines and major changes in the labor market that we're continuing to see. We had all the greats, the great resignation, the great regret, the great reshuffle. We had supply chain issues. And then we continue to see turmoil with things like Russia invading Ukraine, changes in Roe v. Wade, and then obviously the impacts of Silicon Valley Bank failing. And so as you look at what we've been through the last several years, it's no surprise that personal values have made a shift. It's almost like the entire human race just took a deep breath and decided that things that were a priority to them before are no longer the same priorities that they have today. We're seeing people who want more investment in making a difference in their communities and having social responsibility. We want flexibility everywhere. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but flexibility used to mean something very specific. It means something very different now as we look at what flexibility means for us. We also want our employers to have a holistic view of our health. So we've been talking about mental health for many years now, but it's not just about mental health. It's about our social health, our financial health, and all the aspects that we think of when we define health. We also want to work for organizations that are caring and authentic. No longer are the days of, kind of do it because I said so. We want that transparency and we want to know that our companies are invested in us. And then obviously we want to stay connected, even though that we have had this shift to hybrid and remote work. That doesn't mean that we aren't concerned about the social connections that we had in the office and continue to want to have. So what that's done is it's made that implicit employee agreement that we've had with our employees drastically change. It used to be that I go to work and I get a paycheck and that is the entire agreement. It's just not the case anymore. The things that we used to attract employees like cool offices aren't going to attract employees anymore. They want that different connection, and it's being compounded by these different factors, right? Things like Zoom complexities and fatigue, loss of that social support when we talked about, a hybrid environment, potentially decision burnout, things that we saw from the Great Resignation, the Great Retention, competing priorities, and work-life sway. I think we can all agree that work-life balance is probably an outdated term. I don't know that there's any balance between work and life for a lot of us. And so it's navigating those changes between how much do I want to give at work and how much can I give at home. And then you layer in Gen Z as they come into the workforce and their priorities. One of the biggest things for them is that they want to know that they're walking into an organization that's going to broaden their skill set. So you might have a Gen Z employee who comes in your door, and within the first 90 days, they're starting to ask you, when do I get promoted? What is my path to promotion? They really want to gain relevant experience and work upward in their progress in an organization. So that definitely changes how we think about attracting and retaining talent, as well as how we're internally going to develop that talent going forward. Then you end on Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha is our little ones right now, but it's interesting to see what's going to come ahead for them. They're definitely going to be the best educated generation we've ever had and the most technology immersed, which is really fascinating as we think about and look forward to what generational organizations look like and how we think about utilizing technology and creating great experiences. So all of that is just to set the landscape around what we need to consider has happened the last couple of years and how we think about creating great experiences going forward. And I really want to lead into Gartner's definition of what employee experience means. And I'll read it word for word because I think it's really important. Employee experience is the way in which employees internalize and interpret the interactions they have with their organizations, as well as the context that underlines those interactions. That last part of Gartner's definition is why I think it's so important. The context that underlines those interactions. Your employees, your partners, your clients, they know if you're being honest and transparent. They know if you're talking about having great culture, but then you go and look on Glassdoor and you've got a 2.5 rating on Glassdoor, right? Those messages don't match. And so your employees want to know that the experience you are creating is authentic. And so the best way to start kind of thinking about employee experience in your organization is what are the moments that matter to your employees. You'll see on screen, there's an example here that we've used to kind of navigate some of the moments that matter in an employee's journey. But this should be really specific to your organization. Maybe you have specific markers at 90 days or 60 days or 180 days that are very important for you evaluating the experience of your employees. Also think about all those moments where you might not have invested as much into that experience. So think about that first performance conversation. Maybe the first time that you have to elect benefits, or the first time you have to put in for FMLA. There's all of these moments that matter to our employees that are also life moments. And so how do we think about those? And I think what's really great is when you really get into thinking about employee experience, if you think about it from the perspective of the customer and the customer experience, it's just the same. It's the same way of building that want and desire into your organization that you have when you have a really loyal customer. I am a huge fan of the company called Bombas Socks. And reason being is they have a great return policy. They have a great damage policy. So if your dog eats a hole in your sock, they will replace it. And they have a really great social responsibility, do good imperative to the socks that they sell. And their socks are really expensive. But the price point for me doesn't matter as a customer because I believe in the mission and into what they are doing. So I want to center that for you to think about employee experience the same way as how do you create that stickiness for your employees? So when you look at this slide, I picked this picture on purpose. And if we were all live together in a room, I would be asking you this question. When you see this picture, what typically comes to mind? I think most people would say that she's leaving, it's her last day. Maybe somebody would say that she's retiring, or maybe she's had a really bad experience at this office and she's being a little snarky as she leaves. But what if we change the script? What if we think about this as her first day? What if we had given her a communication that said, hey, Julie, tomorrow's your first day, and in this package is a box. We want you to put in the box all the things that bring you joy. And we want to make sure that you have time on your first day to be able to decorate your space the way you see fit that brings you joy and productivity. And maybe we can't see, off screen that she's being clapped into the office, right? Even as I tell you this story, and I've told this story many times, I get excited about the prospect of an employee being able to walk into an organization and feel that love and transparency and support. And that shift is where we're seeing things like companies become more employee-centric, lean into flexibility, think about how collaboration is different than just individual contributors. How do they connect digitally? How do they drive transparency? How does diversity become the fabric of their organization and not just a check the box? And then how do they become well-being responsive? So we're going to get into how do you even get started with this? And a big part of that is HR being the curator of that experience. And it doesn't necessarily just mean HR, it's businesses, it's partners, it's those that can influence how we approach things. But there's definitely this shift from HR being a tactical administrator to a marketer to a curator, right? Going beyond the things like we talked about, open office and snacks, right? But like things like not leaving new hires stranded as you think about a fully remote workforce or a hybrid workforce, or thinking about how do you make those connections from somebody who's fully in office to somebody who's fully remote, maybe in your organization, who don't have the same kind of connection that they've had before. All of these things, if you put yourself in the curator of these experiences, can really help you change your mindset on your role in developing great process. You know, great process doesn't have to be devout of a really great relationship with your employees. So a really great place to start is by listening. Start with the voice of the employee. And I use this picture kind of like a paparazzi, because if you think of your employees that way, right, as maybe a finicky rock star who has on their writer that they only eat purple M&Ms, right, you can start to create one size fits one experiences for your employees that help to elevate the things that you want to accomplish in your business and the values that you have. And you do that obviously through listening with your customers, same thing with your employees. So do internal surveys, focus groups, have those one-on-one conversations, do informal polls. If you are doing an annual engagement survey, gather that data and be able to share that back out to your organization on what you've learned and what impacts you've had based on those surveys results. Do exit interviews. But if you're not doing this, this is the last one that I think is most important on the slide, is stay interviews. For those employees that are staying at your organization or have stayed at your organization in the last couple of years, why do they stay? What keeps them there? What are they excited about? And what would get them to leave? Sometimes those conversations are really interesting. We think that it might be based on pay, right? And a lot of times it's not. Maybe it's, hey, you know what? If somebody called me today and they said, you have 5 weeks of PTO versus 4 weeks of PTO if you come here, that might be enough for that person to leave. It could be something even simpler than that. Maybe somebody has a very specific technology they like to use. They want to use a Mac instead of a PC. And maybe that's the thing that keeps somebody in your organization. Conducting stay interviews is a really great way to understand your employee voice and help to continue to curate experiences as they change. Again, you want to start with mapping that current experience, though. When you go back to those moments that matter, think through each one of those buckets and start to capture those details, right? What are the dependencies and variances that you're going to see? What are the pain points and barriers? Where are the key people touching your employees? You know, one of the exercises that we went through several years ago was revamping our onboarding program. And we realized during this phase of mapping the experience that our new hires were receiving about 25 emails in that first 2 weeks before they started their job. And they were all really great information. Some were from their manager, some were from the system, some were from the onboarding team, some were from recruiting, some were from HR. And that sounds great, like, oh man, you're communicating all this really great information. But the reality is that was really overwhelming. And there wasn't one source of truth for this potential candidate to go back and look at and know where to find the information they needed. So we consolidated all that communication into 5 emails. And really, it's only 3 emails because 2 of those emails come from the system. One's your password, one's your login. And so you had to get really, really tight about thinking about the experience and the communication that you wanted to give to that employee so they could find all the information they needed, but also not take away from anything that we thought that they needed. So really starting by mapping the current experience is important. And then start implementing change. You know, a lot of times we can get stuck in that analysis paralysis when we go through an exercise like that. Do an impact assessment and see what some of those low-hanging fruits are that you can start to change right away and make some momentum on employee experience. You know, maybe you'll discover something if you are an organization that has snacks in the office, maybe people don't like the snacks. So maybe there's something simple that you can do like that to make a quick change that has a big impact. So that's about kind of the experience itself and mapping it out. Let's talk a little bit about recruiting strategies, right? We've definitely seen a pivot into the talent landscape today. You know, the speed at which people are applying and expecting responses has changed. And so we need to focus more on also creating a great candidate experience. And when we do create that great candidate experience, it helps us long-term with our brand. So some of those things that when you think about recruiting strategies is, where are you recruiting? Are you on TikTok doing TikToks to recruit talent? Are you still developing relationships with colleges and trade schools? How are you using social media and advertising? How do you think about that retention piece when somebody comes in the door? You know, what's your highest turnover? Is it at 6 months? Is it at 90 days? Beyond that, is it beyond 90 days? And how do you think about those things and creating those great candidate experiences? You know, nothing is worse than when you are applying for a new job and you get on the job posting website and it says, click here to upload your resume, one button. And you're like, wonderful, great. So you upload your resume and the very next screen is you have to copy and paste all the exact same information in. As a candidate, that can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of things like that when we think about creating experiences where the technology doesn't always match. So your candidates are definitely a category you need to think about. So beyond just attracting them, how do you think about developing those partnerships with your managers as you're going through the recruitment process? You know, this is something that I think sometimes there definitely can be a disconnect. And so make sure that you're spending some time really digging in with those managers in intake meetings, what it is that they're looking for. We all know that they're going to come to you and say, I want the purple unicorn squirrel who is really great at data, has IEQ, and is resilient, right? And we're like, that's great. What does the job need? And so tracking through those different things as, you know, what exactly does this job need and how can we meet those expectations up front so you can continue to create that great candidate experience that I talked about. And it's going to help you build those relationships with managers going forward, right? It's going to help you come to those business meetings, understand how the talent that is being assigned to these business units are going to meet their goals. And then beyond that, continue to provide training for your entire management team and interview team so that they know the do's and don'ts. They understand how to ask behavioral questions and use the STAR method, right? Educate them on what unconscious bias is. You know, one of the things that was introduced that I think we maybe have missed when we went to so much virtual interviewing is you're opening up potentially yourself to personal information about the hiring manager and or the candidate. And if you are really savvy about that, that might work to your advantage in the interview process. If I'm sitting interviewing with you and I notice that on your bookshelf, you have a book about dogs, right? And you're really into dogs, I might start having a conversation with you. And maybe I'm introducing bias because now we have a common connection around dogs. And I drift away as an HR manager or as the hiring manager and focus on that instead of the job skill. And so it's really important for us to have those conversations and trainings with our hiring managers about how to think about evaluating candidates in that different way. And so providing really great resources is good for that, as well as continuing to think about how you elevate your candidate experience, right? Make sure that you're thinking about the communication cadence when somebody applies for a job. Make sure that you're using the right technology throughout the process. You know, are you having multiple technology touch points where maybe they're getting texts, maybe they're getting emails, maybe they're getting communication through your ATS? Think about how you can streamline that experience for them so that it's not as complicated. And then don't forget the human touch and authenticity. You know, it's very nice to get a handwritten letter from a recruiter once you've had that candidate offer and you're able to move into an organization. The next thing is leveraging your brand. If you're thinking about how do you create a great employee experience, it should match the authenticity of your customer experience and your customer brand. Nothing is worse than, falling in love with a company and then coming in the door as an employee and realizing that those things don't match. And so when they do match, what's great about it is that it creates this unified description of what your company is. When we think of companies like Salesforce or Zappos, we know what their business model is. We know what they're trying to do as far as their sales and their profit and their innovation. But we also have learned a lot about what they do for their employees. There's lots of books and resources and articles that you've read about Zappos, right? And the great culture that they have. And so that branding has kind of come through not only in the work that they do, but also in how they treat their employees. So think about your brand presence if you haven't done that yet. If you aren't on social, if you aren't thinking about how your website has a culture component, might be the time to start thinking about that, because especially Gen Z is looking at this information in totality of your organization and what kind of experience they're going to get when they walk in the door. And this helps to really think about how you can future-proof your hiring, right? As you think about this holistic approach, you can lean into things like data and efficiencies and creating these great employee experiences. But you do that by leveraging something called an EVP. Again, this is a really great resource. If you don't have something like this in your organization, now is probably the time to put it together. EVPs can be very complex and very complicated, but they can also be really simple. It's looking at kind of that marriage of values and culture and how that comes to life and how you help your employees tell the story of why they work for your organization. When it's done well, it really offers this comprehensive look of the jobs and how each job makes a difference in your organization. It's going to set you apart from your competition. It's going to draw in those employees or those candidates that have the same values and passions that you do. And it's going to, again, elevate your employee brand. I tell people this because it's part of the reason why I came to Paylocity. I was a client over 7 years ago and completely fell in love with the software and the client experience and being part of something as a co-creator from a product perspective. And when there was an HR opening at this company, I was like, wow, I could work for this company. And I was continuously amazed as I walked the door and made that transition to an employee. And it really showed to me that something like our EVP, right? People who care during work that matters, was true. And it aligned to not only the product I was seeing from a customer perspective, but what I was experiencing as an employee. So it's really important to think about your employee experience in totality as to how it marries to your customer experience and the things that you want to do in that space. So let's dig into a little bit about how that has changed priorities in the new areas of work and how that's going to influence some of the things that I've been talking about when it comes to employee experience. And I'll just throw a reminder out there. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I will leave a little bit of time if I see any come in to answer them. So let's talk about why we're seeing these changes and what's driving them. This first one is really going to be around employee well-being. And I think it's just really interesting, the shift that we've seen for well-being, especially because of what's come out of the pandemic. 74% of employees are concerned about at least one aspect of their well-being as a result of the virus. I'm sure you've seen information around long-term COVID effects. We've seen things like changes in the role of EAPs, rise of more ERGs, so employee resource groups. We've seen our leadership team across the board in many companies start to model good mental health practices. I've heard more leaders talk about boundaries in the last couple of years than I've ever heard in the last, 15 years of my career. So there's definitely this move towards thinking about employees holistically, their mental health, their physical health, their social health, and their financial health. You'll see things like the rise of not just tuition reimbursement, but tuition repayment plans. And so I think this is a really good move and a really good shift that we're seeing in the priorities of our employees as well as our organizations. but it has to be built on psychological safety, right? There has to be ability for you to have really honest conversations with your employees, and your employees to be able to come to you and have those same conversations. And I'll share a story from earlier in my career where psychological safety really meant a lot to me, and it meant a trusted partner. You know, I was coming into an organization that had a lot of turmoil, and I had been there just a couple weeks, and I had been told that they had been saving some terminations for me, which is really great. What you want to hear as a new HR person into an organization, that they were saving some terms for you. Come to find out that they were high level terminations, a chief financial officer and a director of marketing. And in this process of having to deliver these terminations, I gave the wrong severance package to one of the employees. And I remember walking out of that meeting, realizing what I had done and thinking, I'm going to get fired. I've been here 2 weeks. I would fire me. This is a big mistake. Obviously took complete ownership of it, went and talked to my boss and said, hey, I messed up. I did this thing. Here's the impact of it. And they were like, how it happened? And I was like, oh, I grabbed the wrong folder. Like, I was being cautious not to have somebody's name on it and gave the wrong folder. And her response to me was, you'll probably never do that again, will you? And I was like, well, no, obviously I would never do that again. And what was great in that moment is not only was I able to make a mistake, I was able to take ownership, but I was able to have a conversation with somebody who said, things happen. And so how do we get through them? And how do we think about making changes and growing from that? So that's kind of an extreme example about psychological safety. There's plenty of opportunities for us to demonstrate and share psychological safety in our organizations, especially giving members of our team space to take risks and fail and learn from those. And again, that goes back to keeping your finger on the pulse, right? Listening to your employees through pulse checks, understanding where they sit from a well-being perspective, and gathering that data so that you can continue to approach that particular wellness bucket holistically. You know, if you aren't surveying your employees on what kind of benefits offerings they want, that's a really great way to do it as well. You know, sometimes you'll be surprised at what you uncover. Here at Paylocity, one of our biggest buckets is pets. We have a lot of pet parents. And so it's important that over the years, we added pet insurance for our employees to be able to partake in that. So just an idea for you to think about what kind of ways you can continue to keep a pulse on your employees and think about what they want. Next up is that employees want more work freedom. I think we've definitely heard this. We've seen this in the news. You know, as organizations are requiring employees to come back, we're seeing the fallout of that. And so I think this is definitely an area that is going to continue to evolve in our organizations. We're going to continue to try to figure out what remote/hybrid work looks like. But flexibility doesn't just mean that anymore. So flexibility used to be that little carrot when you were recruiting and you'd say, hey, you know what, at our organization, you get to work remote 1 day a week. Or I'm aging myself a little bit here, but for those of you who might remember that the carrot of, hey, on Fridays, it's jeans day, right? And you get to do that. That no longer is the thing that's going to attract people when it comes to flexibility. You know, real flexibility, like this Adam Grant code, is having the autonomy to choose your people, your purpose, and your priorities. And the way we're seeing this come to life at work is flexibility means I get to choose when I work, where I work, how I work, who I work with, what projects I work on, and potentially what technology I want to use when I'm working on it. And so we're seeing that shift from location flexibility to time and tools flexibility. And that sway that I talked about is work is becoming way more intertwined into your everyday life. You know, for me personally, I'm somebody who gets up early with the dogs. I'm probably up for about 45 minutes. I have a cup of coffee. I get online for a couple hours, maybe take a shower around 8:30, then back online at 9 o'clock for several hours. And I flow back and forth throughout my day for that. I'm very fortunate that I have a role that I can do that. But that kind of flexibility is what we're seeing more people talk about and more people desire to have in their roles and in their organizations. And you might be thinking, okay, Shari, that's great for knowledge workers who are in the office and or who are fully remote and can do that. What about my manufacturing employees? What about my employees who work in retail or who work in hospitality and don't have that same kind of flexibility? This is where I think we need to start thinking about how we're defining those terms of flexibility. So I give you an example on screen here is, can you give your employees the flexibility to manage their own shifts? So if you offer something like shift swapping in your organization, where they have to go through a manual approval process through their manager, can you give them the ability to put that into their hands and create the parameters in whatever HCM tool that you use so that they can do it themselves, right? There's flexibility there. You know, maybe you have something as simple as a holiday party you have every year, and you've gotten some feedback on it, right? Can you offer flexibility on how people attend that party or not attend that party? You know, we had for a long time here, we sent out Lou Malnati's pizzas to people in our organization. And one of the things that we heard is people were like, yeah, I'm gluten-free. Like, you're sending me a pizza and I'm going to throw it away. And so we flexed, right? And we gave people the opportunity to, hey, if you don't want a pizza, you could donate to one of these 10 charities, or we'll donate on behalf of you. And so it's really redefining how you think about flexibility and getting really creative about it. You know, maybe there's an opportunity for you to offer different shifts than you've ever offered before in your organization, or maybe you could flex to a Saturday. I think that is one of the benefits that has come out of the pandemic, is the opportunity for us to think bigger and differently than we ever had before. You know, there were so many food establishments that did not do delivery that were very, very quickly able to figure it out. And so I think the excitement in that is good. And I think it's going to continue to progress as we think about defining work and defining flexibility. Next up is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. You know, here at Paylocity, we follow the DEIA model. Some organizations are adding a B for belonging, but we all know that inclusive companies are 120% more likely to hit financial goals. And I think that what's been really great about the conversations we're having around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility over the last several years has moved us away from being completely data metrics driven to having holistic, robust, and tough conversations about what inclusivity really looks like. And I'll share a story where this really kind of rubber met the road for me when I thought about that term inclusivity and being able to show up and bring your authentic self to work. So I had an employee who was working here at Paylocity. Obviously, we're a tech company, and so we have all the tech company things, the pool table and the, you know, cool cafeteria and the gym and all that stuff, and a very relaxed dress code. And this particular employee loved to wear sport coats and a tie and a dress shirt every day. And this person was getting a little bit of static from their coworkers. And it was interesting because the conversation that I got to have with the employee was, hey, you know what, I'm showing up to work and I'm bringing my authentic self in this great environment, and I still don't feel like people are including me because I don't want to wear a hoodie to work, or I don't want to go play pool during the day. I want to focus this way. And so even in that moment, it was a great way to have a conversation with that employee, and then holistically with the group, to talk about, what does inclusivity mean, right? And how do we think about it and talk about it and make sure that we're showing up in a way where we are being inclusive to everybody? And that's just one dimension of, right, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. There are so many different things that are involved with it, and so many opportunities for us to look at our processes and our programs and the ways that we talk to people, the ways that we think about development opportunities, the ways that we may or may not put barriers on promotions, and how we are targeting our recruitment methods. You know, sometimes I've heard the feedback of, well, hey, you know, I'm only attracting a certain talent pool and I don't know how to expand that. Well, you know, what kind of organizations are you partnering with? Is there community organizations that better match the demographics of the communities that you're in, that you can partner with to attract different types of talent? So I'm really excited about what we're seeing in the DEIA space. And I think it's going to continue to influence and reinvent our employee experience as we think about expanding that beyond just the limited definitions that we've looked at in the past. Additionally, employees want to do good, right? I talked about this at the very beginning, that there's this drive for more social interaction, especially for organizations that have to abide by the ESGs, right? That's spilling over into private organizations as well. And so looking at opportunities to encourage the do good, feel good mentality, right? Can you build into your organizations give back opportunities where they can give back either through financially or through volunteering? Could you institute volunteer hours? That's something that we have in our organization. Employees get 16 hours every year to volunteer. Obviously, we have a process in place for that and criteria around it being a 501c3, but it's a really great opportunity to help elevate the passions that your employees have, but also being able to give back to the community. And again, employees want a modern HR, right? So as you think about the modern HR approach to things, they want HR professionals who are thinking about agility when approaching development programs. One size fits all doesn't work anymore. They want somebody who's coming to the table with a partner mindset. That's true both for your employees and for your business partners, right? As HR professionals, we have a very unique perspective to talk about how talent can elevate the mission of our companies, and how really having a great understanding of where we're applying talent is going to help us meet our business goals. And so I really encourage you to think about how you show up as an HR person and bring that partnership to the table. Continue to educate yourself, right? Webinars like this are a great opportunity to learn more. If you're not certified, go get your certification, get together with other people on LinkedIn, continue to learn and push yourself to be the most modern HR person that you can be. And then continue to try new things and be able to take some risks yourself and learn from your experiences, and being able to share that with your employees with your own authenticity. And so as we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about what's coming. As you think back to, March or January or February of 2020, where we were then compared to where we are now in, September of 2023, there's been some wild changes. And I think there's a lot more changes coming. So obviously, automation and artificial intelligence are a very big talk track right now. If you aren't using ChatGPT, I highly encourage you to start using it. It's a really great tool. I tell people, think about it kind of a little bit like your intern. They can help you create your first draft. If you ever want tips on using ChatGPT, feel free to reach out to me, because I think it's one of the great things that as we think about automation and artificial intelligence, it's going to augment the work that we're already doing in our organizations. I don't think it's going to replace us. I don't think we're going to have robots working next to us anytime soon. But I do think that we have really great tools available to us. Future work, we're going to continue to see flexibility change and what that means. I'm really curious to see how this expands globally and how we think about travel in the US when it comes to work flexibility. Gig economy. I talked very briefly about this, but I read an article just today that talked about Gen Z and how they are looking at their jobs much differently than other generations. I've been at this organization 7 years, which is the longest I've ever been anywhere. Most people are staying in their roles anywhere from 2 to 3.5 years. But as Gen Z comes into the workforce, they're looking at work differently. And so it's kind of like a smorgasbord of what I want to do. Could I do 5 hours of this job a week? Could I do 10 hours of this job? And it gives me time to do, 20 hours of what I want to do. And so it'll be interesting to see how the gig economy continues to change and elevate and push our views of what a traditional, FTE looks like. Next, we're seeing a shift on a more skills-based approach to jobs. So moving a little bit away from your typical job description with responsibilities and outcomes, and more thinking about these stacks of skills. And if you think about stacks of skills inside your organization, it gives you way more flexibility when you're thinking about workforce planning and moving people into different roles. You can have a much more holistic view of your organization if you know what the skills exist in it, rather than maybe the outcomes or the responsibilities that your employees have. Again, we talked a little bit about DEIA and B. We're going to definitely continue to see more about belonging as we go forward. Sustainability is not going away either. You know, if you aren't getting questions in your interview process now about your carbon footprint, don't be surprised, they're coming. We have already started to get them from candidates about what our carbon footprint is and how we think about sustainability in our organizations. And we've made changes, right? We've gone from paper plates to glass plates. You know, we've gone from silverware to biodegradable stuff. So it's really interesting to see the changes that are being made across the board there. And then last but not least is ROW. So ROW, results-oriented work, is not a new concept. It's definitely been around for a long time. And if you want to read up on, you know, kind of the great history, I would dig into Best Buy a little bit and their results-oriented work model. But as you think about hybrid work and the stuff that we're trying to accomplish there and creating great experiences, we're moving away from this idea of, well, if I can't see you at your desk, I don't know you're working, and moving more towards what are the results you're being able to deliver today for me, and how is that impacting our bottom line. So I know I wanted to leave a few minutes at the end for questions. If there was any, I don't see any in the Q&A right now, but feel free to drop them in. Like Dan mentioned at the beginning, I host a podcast called the HR Mixtape. I'd love for you to subscribe, like, and share, but always I'm looking to connect with others and build relationships. So I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn if that's something that you want to do. And with that, I will kind of get to the end here, Dan, and hand it off to you and see if there's any questions that come in.
Okay, we do have time for any questions, if you have any right now. So I guess we'll just give it a minute or two and see if there are any. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions. All right, so thank you, Shari, for your thought leadership and sharing your expertise. And we want to thank you to all the UBA partner firm employees and their clients who joined us today. Our next webinar will be on October 17th. The topic will be enhancing employee benefits through a self-funded model. And this will be presented by Allied Benefit Systems. And we'd like to thank you for attending the UBA Employee Benefits webinar series. We look forward to you joining us next month.